Thank you all for coming. Parshas Vayeira. And really I would like to tie in together this week both last week's Parsha, Parshas Lecha, and this week's Parsha, Parshas Vayeira. Because there's a medrash that ties the two Parshas together. The medrash tells us, or asks for us, which nisayon was a harder nisayon? Which test was a greater challenge for Avram Avinu? The nisayon of Lecha, leaving the place of his father, the place of where he grew up, or the Lecha, which Lecha was it more of a challenge, or the Lecha of the Akedah, where Hashem told him, go up to the mountain and ultimately to kill your child. Which was a bigger challenge? The Lecha of Parshas Lecha, to leave the place of his birth where he grew up, or the Lecha of the Akedah? And on the surface, that question seems to be an extremely difficult question. What kind of a question is that? Okay, the Lecha from where he grew up and where he was born, where his family was, probably wasn't so easy, but it definitely was easier. I mean, this was a place that he wasn't so beloved. He just rebelled against the king. They tried to kill him. He miraculously survives the fire and now leaves. That's kind of like what he might have done anyway. Like, let's get out of there. It's not such a terrible nisayon. Okay, but maybe there are reasons why it was somewhat difficult. But to compare it in its level of difficulty to the Akedah, we always make sure to say and talk about the Akedah on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to get from Hashem extra compassion and rachamim because of how difficult that challenge was for Avram Avinu. So perhaps we could say that what in fact was the challenge of Lech Lecha. I'm not going to spend so much time on this because this is really a word for last week's Parsha, but just for the sake of bringing out the point, I believe there are different diyukim to support this idea, but the challenge of Lech Lecha, to leave the place where he was from, was not so much a conscious challenge, but on a level of a subconscious challenge. What do I mean? It was not a nisayon, will you choose to listen or not? It was more than that. It was a nisayon of where are your reflexes. There are mashmos that when Hashem told Avraham, Lech Lecha, from the place where you were born, the place where you grew up, Avraham passed that challenge because he just started going. He didn't ask where, he didn't ask why, he didn't ask how, he just went. Hashem will take care of it as I'm on the way. We could even interestingly imagine that he didn't even ask, which direction should I start walking? He just started going. The idea is he just did it reflexively. Lech Lecha in last week's Parsha was a test of reflex. Was Avram going to listen reflexively to the Ribbono Shel Olam? Ultimately, the Medrash answers that the Akedah was a harder nisayon. The Lech Lecha of the Akedah was harder than the Lech Lecha from last week's Parsha. But why can we even compare the two? Because the Lech Lecha from last week's Parsha was hard in its own way in terms of the fact that it was a challenge for Avram. It was a test, it was an indication, it was a measure of where is he holding? Is he listening to the Ribbono Shel Olam, to Hashem reflexively? Hashem says, go, he went. Oh, if he would sit down and think and cheshbon, and Hashem would say, here's the map, here's the route, this is when you'll arrive, this is when you're leaving. If there's traffic, you'll use ways along the way. You'll figure out the whole situation over. Don't worry. Then, of course, he'll think through it. It won't be such a big deal. But he passed it because it was a test of reflexes, and he reflexively listened. Then, of course, we have the test of the Akedah. A totally different type of test. It wasn't reflexes as much as to what extent are you willing to listen to the Ribbono Shel Olam. This idea that the nisayon from last week of Parshas Lech Lecha was a test of Avraham's reflexes, I think explains to us why there was such a taina on Avraham for asking in last week's Parsha, Bama Eda. All he asked Hashem for was a sign. Hashem, give me a sign that my children will inherit Eretz Yisrael, will inherit the land, will survive. He didn't doubt that it would happen. He wanted to concretize it with a sign. But that's a lack of listening to Hashem reflexively. It was listening to Hashem through thinking it through, which of course is a tremendous madrega we should all reach. But for Avraham, he was establishing Ma'asa Avos Siman Labanim, that Klal Yisrael should listen to Hashem. Reflexively, it should be in their DNA. And therefore, there was a taina. And what was the punishment when Avraham asked Bama Eda and he didn't just listen without questioning it all, without asking for a sign? He didn't do it reflexively. He asked for a sign. He thought it through more. What was the punishment? That your children are going to go to Mitzrayim. They're going to have to go through hundreds of years of slavery. And where will that lead them? What's the culmination of that whole Galus? Maimad Har Sinai. Finally, Klal Yisrael gets to the apex of that experience, which is what? Na'aseh v'nishma. Exactly the expression of Avraham's Lech Lecha. Reflexively listening to the Ribono Shel Olam. Na'aseh, we will do, nishma, then we will listen and understand. But first, what we're going to do. Your wish is my command. You instruct us, Hashem, we're going to act instantly. Na'aseh v'nishma. So they regained that level, according to the way that we're learning, of Avraham's Lech Lecha, which he went down from when he asked Bama Eda. That perhaps is a progression of events. So we have the test of reflexes in Lech Lecha, and we have now in this week's Parsha a test of tremendous devotion and commitment to be willing to give up something so we can't even imagine how near and dear the child Yitzchak was to him. And of course the Medrash does end off that was the harder Nisayon. Let's think about the lesson that we can take out of really Nisyonos in general. But here we are confronted in the midst of Avram's 10 Nisyonos. We're looking at the Nisayon of Lech Lecha. We're looking at the Nisayon of the Akedah. Let's think about what we learn and what we can take from these Nisyonos. If I had to sum up for you, what is the most defining factor, the most defining midah, most defining character trait that will separate the success from the failure? Those people who achieve greatness in their lives, that doesn't have anything to do with fame or fortune, but greatness. They approach reaching their potential. They accomplish. They build big, happy, beautiful families with devotion and commitment. They're successful people and Yidden versus those who are not so successful. What is the most defining feature and character trait? There was a test that was done. I might have shared this with you before. Back in the 60s or 70s. All those who want to see a video of it, I have it on my computer here. I could show it to you right afterwards, real quick. It's a reenactment of it in more modern day. There was a test done with little kids, where they took all these little kids, and one by one they put them in a room, and the person administering the test came into the room and placed a marshmallow down in front of them, and told them, this marshmallow is yours. You can eat it right now if you want. However, let's hear me out. I'm going to go out of the room for an unspecified amount of time. And when I come back, 5 to 10 to 15 minutes later, that amount of time, if you didn't take one nibble from that marshmallow, if it's still whole, you will receive a second marshmallow. That's the test. And there were cameras set up to record what went on. So there's a video that I can show you afterwards of a reenactment of this with more modern day kids, with a modern day instructor doing this whole thing, and it's really cute to watch. Certain kids do really well at it. Certain kids are going crazy but still succeed. Certain kids just take the marshmallow and stuff it in their mouth immediately. And those kids that succeed get the second marshmallow at the end. And you say, what's the purpose of this test? I mean, why is it so important to wait for another marshmallow? For a kid, there's reason to wait to get a second marshmallow. And it tests this most important midah: self-control, self-discipline. You're born with a certain amount of self-control. Different personalities, different environments in which we grow up in foster and nurture levels of self-control. So we have it to an extent, or we don't have it to an extent, and we have it to a lower extent with birth and in our young years. And this showed it to be true. But what so many people make a mistake about is they think, oh, we can't build it. You got what you got, and you don't have what you don't have. They tracked these kids from the 60s or 70s over the course of many years. And they saw consistently those kids that waited for that second marshmallow, and therefore ingrained within them, had a higher level of self-control, a stronger self-control. Very understandably so. I think we would say it makes a lot of sense, and they found it to be true. Spent more years in school, had more higher degrees in colleges and postgraduate universities, better jobs, higher salaries, better marriages, better families altogether. All the ingredients of what we would really determine makes a happy life they had. Success and true happiness. When I say happiness, I don't mean excitement and joy, jumping around and dancing around. I mean contentness, inner peace, fulfillment of life, feeling good about yourself and your life, deeply good, accomplishment good. They had it way more proportionally according to the way that they passed that marshmallow test, as it became famously known. Most mistakes in life are the result of a lack of self-control. And we might ask ourselves, it's so difficult. There are so many nisyonos and taivas out there. How do we consistently succeed? After all, if I'm faced with a nisayon and I fight and I fight and I fight and I fail, okay, we could hear all the mussar about Sheva, you pulled tzaddik, come, you fell, just try again. But if I keep failing, if I keep going back to my old, aren't I a failure? Aren't I not building my self-control? And the answer is, that is a huge mistake, and it is exactly what discourages people from working on self-control, because people mistakenly look at it as black and white. All or nothing. Either I succeed in totally obliterating this taiva from my life, then I've built my self-control, and I'm a more self-disciplined person. I have more stronger self-control. But if I fail, I haven't built my self-control at all. It's totally not true. All modern-day psychology, and it makes a lot of sense in of itself, does not agree with that point. Self-control is built every minute, every second that you spend working on it. Mashal lama davar doma. Self-control can be compared to a physical muscle in the body in many ways. So you go to the gym and you want to build your bicep. So you start doing some curls. And you go in the gym with the following goal in mind. I'm going to do 50 curls today. That's my goal for today, 50. 50 with a 30-pound weight. Good workout for your biceps. Okay. So as you're going, you get to 20, you get to 30, you're starting to get really tired. You get to 40 and you give up. So you got to 40. Would we say to that person, you failed? You wasted your time at the gym. Would we say that? No, that's ridiculous. You didn't waste your time at the gym. You didn't accomplish the lechatchila, the main goal that you set, but you did 40. The next time you go into the gym, you're going to have a much easier time doing 40 and then even getting to 50. You built your muscle significantly. By going from 30 to 40, it was really hard to get those last 10, and you really built your muscle at that point. You are stronger because you worked at it. All of muscle building is working against resistance. If you just do it in the air, it's doing pretty much nothing. If you do it with 1 pound, it's doing nothing. But as soon as it becomes 10, 20, 30 pounds, it's something. You're building muscle. Working against the resistance builds that muscle. And it is the same way with mental muscle, namely self-control. You work out your self-control muscle, you're making it stronger, and you're more likely to succeed in the future. And if you fail again, but you continue to work it out and exercise it, you're more likely to succeed in the future. Self-control and building self-control absolutely can be compared to building muscle. A person should never despair and say, I didn't accomplish the goal that I set out. I wasted my time. I'm back at square one. No, you're not. As long as you're accomplishing 2 main criteria along the way, which are all summed up as working at it. really working hard at it. A, never, ever, ever give in to that nisayon, to that taiva instantly, without any delay whatsoever. If you give into it instantly without any delay, you're not just losing out on an opportunity to have worked hard on building your self-control. It's not like you missed a day at the gym. You actually punched your muscle. You actually injured your muscle, your self-control muscle. Why? Because of habit. If we give in to something instantly, we have an urge, we get the pleasure. If it's something good like eating, healthy, let's say, at the right time when you're hungry, nothing so bad, nothing really bad about that at all. It's part of living. But if it's something we shouldn't do, if we give in to it instantly, we began to build a habit. That we fulfill that urge, that taiva, with instant pleasure. And now it actually becomes harder in the other direction, to not have it instantly. But so long as we delay, for an amount of time that was difficult for us, for some people it could be 30 seconds. For some people 5 minutes. For some people an hour. For some people a day. As long as we delay, and the urge is there, and we're fighting against it, we're pushing against it, we're building muscle. And we're actually using that opportunity for tremendous benefit. The beauty of self-control, unlike building any particular muscle, is that it's a muscle that will work for any application of self-control. There's a Rebbe, I believe here in the Mechina, who often talks about, or sometimes talks about, having self-control in areas of eating, of food. Why? Why that? Because it's a daily activity that we do multiple times a day. So he says, let's say when it comes to, I don't know exactly the details of what he says, but what we could say about this topic is, there's something called a tainus ravid, I believe is what it's called. You leave over a little piece of food at the end. Little piece of food at the end. What's the point of that? It's not a piece of food that's going to make such a big difference to you. But you're even in the dvarim hamutarim, even in those things that you're allowed to eat the piece of food. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But you're building self-control so that when a negative thing, when a bad thing comes your way and you're enticed by it, you'll have more self-control muscle to say no. Because you're working out your self-control muscle. You could say to yourself, I shouldn't be eating past 9 p.m. Thursday nights will be the night that I eat past 9 p.m. We'll give a heads up to everyone in the room here. But every other night, maybe Friday nights. But the other nights, or the opposite extreme. I'm usually eating a lot after 9 p.m. Okay. One night a week, I won't. One night. All of these ideas and strategies are simple techniques to build self-control. And as you continue to build that mental muscle, it, like I said before, it strengthens and gives you strength in every nisayon. Now, obviously, it's going to give you the most bang for your buck. It's going to give you the most strength in exactly the nisayon where you're building it. So if you feel like you have a nisayon when it comes to speaking lashon hara, and you really work on always delaying 10 minutes before you say any piece of lashon hara. Sometimes you don't even end up saying it. You have a total success. Sometimes you end up saying it after 10 minutes, but it's really hard for you. It's challenging, which is the ikr. That is exactly the crux of what defines it as working out that muscle. And you're doing that every time, 10 minutes, every time, 10 minutes. Not, obviously, the most strength you're gaining from that is when it comes to lashon hara directly, because you're directly working on that. But it actually lends strength to every other nisayon and challenge you have in life. Because it's the same self-control muscle. It's the ability to say no. It's not going to work as much, but even it will work and help in every area of life. It's an amazing thing. Like I mentioned, there's the power of a habit. If we allow ourselves that instant gratification, then there's the power of the habit that starts to build in a negative way. But on the flip side, there's the power of the habit that can be built in the positive way. Hurgul is something that can be used for the negative or the positive, a habit. If we get used to saying no after 10 minutes, it's likely that it will become habituated, as it's called. It'll become hurgul, as Chazal might call it. And now what will happen? 10 minutes won't be such a challenge for us anymore. We need to go up to 15 or 20 minutes, etc., etc. That's the avodah of building self-control and using the power of habit to make it more and more successful as time goes on. The power of habit, I just want to digress for a minute, is an unbelievable thing. I just finished reading a book called The Power of a Habit. Brand new scientific research on habits. They discovered this from multiple patients, more recently from an elderly man, I think he just passed away recently, last few years, who had a bacterial infection in his brain. And the bacteria ate away a very specific, it didn't just spread all over, it was contained to a specific region of the brain. For psychologists, whether you think this is appropriate or not, or empathic or not, saw this as an opportunity. We can now study what we can't take a human being and cut out a part of their brain and say, let's see what happens now. Well, let's take the next human being and cut out a different part. In ancient times, they actually did things like that. We can't do that. But here was an opportunity to study what will happen. And it was interesting because one of the core centers of the brain that scientists call the basal ganglia, that's the name they made up for it, it's a core center part of the little piece of brain, was unaffected by the bacteria, completely untouched. But there were other more conscious, higher levels of thinking parts of the brain that were pretty disrupted. So this guy, he still remembered his name, he still recognized his wife, he's an older man, and he still knew how to eat and do basic functioning and those things. He could still walk. But there are certain areas of consciousness, he didn't know his address. He could never ever remember his address. He couldn't remember whether he ate breakfast that morning, even if he ate it half an hour ago. He could try to tell from how full he feels. Interesting disruptions he had in the brain. But what was most fascinating to the researchers was he would go out for a walk every morning. And when he'd go out for the walk, people were worried, he's not going to know how to get home, he doesn't know the address. He always made it back home, day after day after day, no problem. And they did multiple tests to show that this was what was going on. What they discovered what was going on is that if they'd ask him in the middle of the walk, when he's 3 blocks away, point in the direction of your house, he'd say, I have no idea. What's the address? I don't know. Which turns do you take? Give me the basic directions. I don't know. So how are you going to get home? All I know is if I just let myself walk, I'll get home. And every day, day in and day out, he got home. One day he didn't get home. There was a storm the night before. And bushes got messed up. And certain parts of the scenery got messed up. Couldn't make it home. He got lost for hours. What happened? They were able to tell, again, with a lot of functional MRIs and brain imaging and scanning and other tests in a room, more controlled tests. I'm just telling you one little tidbit of this patient's studies, what they did with this patient. So they were able to tell that the basal ganglia, this core part of the brain, separate from the conscious thinking parts of the brain, is where habits are stored. Once a person develops something into a habit, it actually gets stored in a separate location. You can imagine it almost as if you have a computer and you have portable hard drives plugged into the computer. So you could have information, data on this portable hard drive. Your computer's hard drive could get corrupted, and a lot of data on the computer could get corrupted and messed up. But the portable hard drive is separate. It's not corrupted, and the information there is accessible. Our habits, even though they govern so much of our conscious lives, actually get stored in a separate region physically in the brain than our conscious thinking. It's an amazing thing to think about. And it shows why habits are so difficult to break. And we can't reason with our habits. We can't talk ourselves out of our habits many times. It's so difficult. So that's what that book is all about. Harnessing that power. And that's what I'm talking to you about. When we build our self-control day after day after day, even with simple things like delaying, not giving in instantly, we're developing good habits. When a person has a bad habit that he develops, this research means it's so difficult to break, but it's doable. You just got to recognize that you're rewriting the habit. As you do it, you'll then develop it into a good habit, and it will be reinforcing, and it will become easier over time. That's the light at the end of the tunnel. It becomes easier over time. That's the power of a habit and the power of strengthening our mental muscle, self-control. Never giving in instantly. Always delaying and ultimately decreasing frequency of giving into whatever the nisayon or taiva is. We then build ourselves. We build our self-control, and in any other area where we might have maybe an easier way of working on self-control, think about that area. It could be eating, it could be other areas. Because those are, again, opportunities to build that muscle of self-control to be used in other areas, like we mentioned. There's a great book I recommend to everyone called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Famous book. Written by, I think, Stephen Covey, if I have this right. And his son wrote a book by Sean Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, which I highly recommend as well. These books are built on the principle of all of life, and whether it becomes an ultimate success or failure. This obviously applies to everything, including Ruchnius and Gashmius, because our ability to learn well and do mitzvahs on a consistent basis is all rooted in the same stuff. It's built on us establishing good habits and eradicating and working on and getting rid of ultimately bad habits, which is all rooted in what we're discussing, strengthening self-control. So, Mirz Hashem, we should be zochem to learn from the Avram Avinu. What built him? Learn from the nisyonos of Avram Avinu. The 10 nisyonos. That's the way we remember Avraham's rise to godless. It was through the nisyonos that actually built him to become who he was. It was the resistance, the challenge, the difficulty that he had to overcome that built his levels of self-control, self-discipline, that established the good habits that led him to become the tzaddik, the Av of all of Klal Yisrael that he became. So we should learn from those nisyonos. We should take the lessons to heart. Try our best. We can never achieve perfection. To get as close as possible to making it automatic, to habitually listening to the mitzvahs of Hashem, almost reflexively listening to the mitzvahs of Hashem, as the nisayon of Lecha teaches us. To be able to even listen when there's so much at stake, when it's so difficult, as the nisayon of Lecha by the Akedah teaches us. And through succeeding in our nisyonos over time, never falling into despair, trying so hard, especially to never give in instantly. Can't stress that enough. We'll be able to build ourselves into such great people. Give the Ribbon Shalom so much nachas that it'll bring Mashiach Tzidkenu b'meher v'yameinu. Amen.